Hello and welcome. Today, we are taking a look at possibly the most polarizing game in the entire Resident Evil franchise, Resident Evil 6. From my perspective, 6 is the finale to a trilogy of games which started with Resident Evil 4. These games not only represent a massive transitional period for the series, but they also reflect the shift into action and drama present within the entire industry at the time. If RE5 jumped the shark, then RE6 pretty much jumped out of this world and rocketed into deep space. Because sometimes it's hard to tell how much this game is even related to the rest of the series. For starters, we have a huge cast of characters, including series regulars Leon, Chris, and Ada. We're even reintroduced to Sherry Birkin from Resident Evil 2, and meet new faces like Piers and Helena. And of course, who can forget, Wesker's edgy, estranged son, Jake. The main draw of Resident Evil 6 is its 4 story campaigns, which each feature 2 protagonists. Basically, it's series veterans joined by newcomers, and they go on a Resident Evil themed roller coaster. There are so many cutscenes in this game, and it honestly comes across like they were trying to make this into some kind of cinematic experience. In 2013, it felt kinda epic. But today, I feel like some of the effort they put into making this game so much like a film could have gone toward making a much more cohesive video game in general. Let me explain. RE6 is the first numbered game of the series to feature moving and shooting simultaneously. And you might be saying to yourself, finally, wasn't this change long overdue? And to that I say, maybe. To be fair, games like the Mercenaries 3D and Revelations on the 3DS played around with letting the player move and shoot. For the most part, these spin-off games are nearly identical to Resident Evil 5, with this movement change applied on top. It was positively received, so Capcom doubled and tripled down on this idea for 6. In addition to moving and shooting, you can also sprint, slide, roll, dodge, and even crawl, with the ability to shoot while lying on your back. I also have to mention the brand new hand-to-hand combat feature, accompanied by a whole-ass stamina gauge. At this point, everyone who has dabbled in this trilogy of RE games is familiar with the melee attacks, which added an up-close and personal aspect to combat for RE4 and 5. RE6 takes this and expands on it, allowing the player to literally bash, punch, and kick by pressing the attack button. You also have 360 degrees of full movement, along with an independent camera. All of this comes together to create easily the most active and freeform movement of any Resident Evil game ever. Personally, I like this new movement philosophy a lot. But unfortunately, all of this comes at the sacrifice of a traditional inventory system. There is this pitiful wheel of your items, which you won't need to manage unless you're converting herbs into healing tablets. Oh yeah, the healing mechanic has been overhauled entirely. You have these health squares that deplete when you take damage. If you take a small amount, the squares are able to regenerate. If an entire square is depleted, you need to use a health tablet to restore it. Health tablets are the traditional herbs of the series converted into these convenient single-button consumables, which allow you to be mobile and heal simultaneously. It's very ridiculous that somehow your character is converting red and green herbs into doses of medicine on the fly, but it's not distracting enough to make me dislike it. All in all, I'm happy that they found a way to let you heal without detracting from the excellent movement capabilities. This is where the complexity of the inventory system ends, however, because healing is about the only reason you're going to mess with that pathetic wheel I mentioned. In Resident Evil 6, you find and consume ammunition at a breakneck pace. Almost every enemy will drop ammo for your plethora of firearms. The method of obtaining new weapons is tied directly to your progression within a given campaign. Each respective campaign will have unique weapons, and there are a few exceptions where specific characters will have unique weapons to themselves. For example, Leon starts with an akimbo pistol and knife, whereas Helena starts with a singular pistol and a shotgun. But all the weapons they obtain within their campaign will be identical. Defeated enemies also drop skill points, which is another brand new mechanic to the Resident Evil series. You use these skill points to purchase perks, which operate very similarly to something like Call of Duty. You can give yourself more effective headshots, the ability to escape grabs easier, or increase the frequency that enemies drop items. Several of these abilities can be upgraded after you earn them, and that's only scratching the surface because there are about 43 unique skills to mix and match. You'll be able to equip 3 skills into a loadout, and you'll earn up to 8 loadout slots by playing through all the campaigns. These loadouts are customized outside of the game, but in-game, you always have the ability to change your loadout on the fly. There is just so much to experiment with, it almost feels overwhelming at first. Over time though, these skills and loadouts serve to diversify your gameplay, and I think that they are an excellent fit for this game as a whole. Shifting focus back to the campaigns, I believe it is standard practice to start things off with Leon's, since the marketing and even the in-game prologue seem to suggest that he is the focal point of the numerous protagonists. Right off the bat, I have to admit that I think the beginning of this campaign is somewhat misleading, as it puts an emphasis on tension building and slowly establishing something closer to horror than action. It's misleading because the rest of the game is absolutely focused on bombast and spectacle. You spend roughly half an hour forced to slowly walk through some kind of facade because there is no other section that feels this on rails and completely separate from the rest of the core experience. Thankfully, once the first chapter is over, the rest of the campaign is dedicated to providing a familiar yet all-new Resident Evil experience. You'll be fighting traditional zombies and biological abominations, which definitely feel a lot more like classic Resident Evil enemies. The next campaign follows Chris Redfield and his new partner Piers Nivens. After the events of RE5, Chris somehow develops a serious case of amnesia, which effectively turns him into a completely different person. Through the course of his campaign, we learn the cause of his condition, but I struggle to feel anything about this other than it's possibly a complete waste of time. When Chris remembers why he has amnesia, he is still acting like some imposter character, and his only motivation in the plot is revenge. And at this point, I won't mince words. I feel as though they bastardized all of the returning characters, and what we see is like a mascot or impression of those characters, rather than a faithful depiction of who they are and how they've grown over the series. It feels like a massive disservice as someone who followed this series all the way to this point, and I couldn't think of a better time to mention all of this. Back on the subject of Chris's campaign, it's kind of like a direct sequel to RE5. The game wastes absolutely none of your time getting into the action, and it might be the most effective application of the new gameplay features. You'll be facing Joavo, the next evolution of Las Plagas enemies introduced in Resident Evil 4. These guys will run around, shoot guns, and mutate into grotesque creatures when they take massive amounts of damage. I don't actually think Chris encounters a traditional zombie, but the amount of completely new enemies makes up for this, and you'll find yourself excited to meet the next horrible bad guy you need to take down. If you're looking for a more seamless transition from RE5 to RE6, the Chris campaign is the best place to start. Our third major campaign follows Jake and Sherry. In this campaign, you fight a medley of enemies including the aforementioned zombies and Joavo, but also some unique ones too. The main attraction of this campaign is the monster named Ustanik. He is meant to personify classic enemies like Mr. X and Nemesis, so you'll fight him time and time again as he grows stronger all the way to the campaign's climax. It's honestly much better on paper because in practice, he's nothing more than another set piece or repeatable boss fight, and you won't feel pressured by this creature in gameplay. I mean, all of the pursuer aspects are shoved straight into the cutscenes, and I think it's one of the game's greatest flops and missed potential. You even might have been excited to learn that Jake is the son of Albert Wesker, but unfortunately this doesn't really lead anywhere either. All of the characters dance around it, and there is practically zero payoff once you reach the end of the campaign. Everyone is honestly better off looking at this guy as a brand new character without expecting anything out of his relationship to the greatest antagonist of the series. The final campaign used to be unlocked once every other character was complete. This is Ada's story, and it is one of the more interesting uses of split narrative design of this game. Its function is to try and fill in a lot of the holes and mysteries of the story while fleshing out some of the leftover ideas for enemies and puzzles. I've heard some players call this the most difficult campaign or the most useless campaign, and it honestly feels the shortest. Personally, I've always seen it as kind of a pleasant send-off to the game. I definitely recommend playing this one last. Thankfully, the greatest minigame ever returns in this Resident Evil, and it is possibly the best iteration in the entire series. The Mercenaries has never been this fast, this spectacular, and this goddamn fun. The goal remains the same as ever: kill as many enemies as you can within a strict time limit, racking up combos and extending your time for the ultimate high score. Doing well earns you new maps and new characters to play as. Each character features their own loadout of weapons and alternate costumes, which also include a unique loadout. You can even choose a single skill like the ones I mentioned before, and the Mercenaries even has unique skills exclusive to this game mode. Once you find a style that suits your taste, you can start learning new gameplay techniques such as counters and the coup de grace. In 6, you now have the ability to perfectly time an attack when an enemy strikes at you, performing a devastating parry. If your parry is strong enough to kill an enemy, you're rewarded with an extra 10 seconds on your clock. Sometimes a parry will leave an enemy in a vulnerable state, where you can perform a coup de grace. These melee attacks are extremely powerful, and a successful kill will earn you 7 seconds. In traditional fashion, any standard melee attack or finisher which kills an enemy will earn you 5 seconds. The benefit of learning more advanced gameplay techniques is immense, and I encourage anyone who tries RE6 to learn these moves for maximum enjoyment. One of the other extra modes introduced in 6 is Agent Hunt, Capcom's version of a versus mode akin to Left 4 Dead. You play through the story campaign with humans playing as the protagonists while other humans play as infected and try to stop them. I can appreciate the variety and the attempt to inject something completely new to the series, but I wish it was implemented a little better. In the end, it's pretty basic, and the result is very few people actually play this mode. When you start a public campaign game, you have the option to allow Agent Hunt at any time. The reality is that people hardly ever invade each other's game. There's an extreme deficit when it comes to coordination, something that makes versus in Left 4 Dead so special. In RE6, it can feel like throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. I feel as though this mode could have been so much better with a little more attention toward creating a more engaging experience for the infected. As it stands, I personally never want to play a campaign unless I'm a human character. In terms of post-release content, RE6 features a plethora of additional multiplayer modes. The sad fact is that no one even plays these game modes, and if you're faced with choosing the base game or deluxe edition, I think you're better off saving your money and simply purchasing the base. There are not any new story campaigns, and there are not any new characters or stages for the Mercenaries mode. For me, this is just another disappointing aspect of the game, especially because these DLC modes never feel populated, even back in 2013. Everything considered, it's unsurprising that this was the last time Capcom tried to bank so heavily on a multiplayer-centric Resident Evil. Ultimately, Resident Evil 6 is the least Resident Evil game of the entire series, for better and for worse. The movement mechanics and combat experience is thrilling and developed in an excellent way where the two facets of gameplay reinforce one another. However, there are almost zero traces of the survival horror games that got this series to the 6th entry. So many conventions have been left by the wayside, and despite how you feel personally, the fans were not happy at the time. I mean, this game faced heavy criticism, and it's easy to understand why. The games that follow, 7 and 8, they did everything possible to expand on the series while also returning to the survival horror roots that compelled so many people to become fans. In retrospect, I hope that more people can see the value in what RE6 does well, because I would never consider it a bad or flawed game. That being said, however, it is absolutely a flawed Resident Evil game, and I'm happy that it created so many waves that we could experience an amazing return to form in Resident Evil 7. In the end, 6 is the culmination of everything Capcom built after the monolithic success of Resident Evil 4. The traces that lead to this action-packed horror shooter are evident, and I respect this trilogy of games for what they are. My hope is that more people can appreciate the ties that bind RE4, RE5, and RE6. Looking forward, I am bursting with anticipation for the RE4 remake. I can't wait to see what Capcom has inherited from the DNA of these games, and I won't be surprised at all to feel something familiar out of the reimagined gameplay. Thank you so much for joining me on this retrospective journey. If you missed my videos on Resident Evil 4 and 5, you should give them a look. My simple goal was to capture my thoughts and feelings about them so that I can analyze the Resident Evil 4 remake using them as a framework. I seriously can't fucking wait for the game to come out so I can sink my teeth into it. If you enjoyed this series, consider leaving a like or a comment and subscribing so you don't miss out when I can finally put out my thoughts on the latest installment of the Resident Evil series. Anyway, my name is Pinello and I appreciate you. See ya!